to get to just the awareness of the Jehovah Genetrix, right? Because most people are aware of Jehovah, but if you understand Gnosticism, which is a group of people who actually lived during a time where this already was going on in their space, where they needed to get the real answers to what kind of entities they were dealing with, this was the conclusions that they came to. Okay. And then when we match that up with what we know, what we find is that, well, there's technically two sides here. There's ones who want to blame the mother, and there's ones who want to blame the father. So either you do one or two things. You say it's both of their fault, or you just get over trying to figure out whose fault it is, and then you move on to the mechanics of how it's all put together. So look at this. It says, I tell it, tell me everything about the Jehovah Genetrix and their connection with the reptilian cults and spirits. Okay. And I needed to push that again because it went in and I was like, I wanted more. So I said, tell me what the Gnostics say about the Jehovah Genetrix. And it says the Gnostics, a diverse set of early Christian sects, held a unique perspective on the divine and its manifestations. Now listen, they believed in a transcendent God, unknowable and unreachable, far removed from the material cosmos, farther in the sky. Because the simple concept here is that we know that the mother is in the great deep, but they found flaws with the mother in their deep theism, dogma, etc. So then they turned to the sky for basically for solutions. They just came to the logical sense that if you keep going to the deep and that's going to slow you down and put you into the netherworld with Vasuki and all the rest of the larger serpent beings and all the other realms from the primordial times, then if you go out there, there must be something better. So that's the simple concept here, is that there's something else out there. And then everything is then paired. It's like if they didn't know Sophia, if they couldn't look in the mirror, if they did not know the Jehovah Genetrix, if they did not know their own mother, they would not be able to find their way back home. Because the only thing the mother did, and this is why there's text of a woman stealing the name of God. The only thing the great mother did is she came in and she created she's not necessarily creating. She's hosting. There is no creation. That's why people can't figure out where nothing comes from. There is none of that. She hosted it. So she basically spread herself out as waters, living waters, and she took all of these seeds in. Okay, that's what happened. So in this, though, you have legacies of beings. So when you're trying to say who did what, you only can think of that. Well, the first kids that came out was probably the ones that you were talking about when we start trying to run stories and their conquests and all this kind of stuff. Not the original. The original still resides there in the water. Like if you want to touch it, you could go put your feet in, right? So let's just think about it like this, so when we're saying with the creator, we're talking about the Jehovah Genetrix as water, reflecting all the stars, bringing all the seeds, and then taking everything to a germination process until eventually some even start walking on land like Oannes supposedly did first, which is only one of her sons. So in this case, it goes and it breaks it down, and it says that this God, the Pleroma, initiated and emanated various divine beings called aeons. To be exact, there were 30 aeons, and Jehovah Genetrix was just one, but she's the one that has the most PR on our planet. Each embodying certain aspects of the divine. These emanations occurred in pairs known as syzygies, representing the balance of masculine and feminine principles. So realize what's going on, that there's a process of creation, but it's very meticulous. This is also in the Doggin tradition. They talk about how this creation process is not something you do if you don't know how to do it. Center myself here real quick. If you don't know how to do it, because it must be done in balance. It's like a laboratory experiment. If you do not put the right things, you're going to create something, but it's not going to be balanced. It will live, but it will live imbalanced. Sometimes that's called an abortion. But even when there's an abortion, it lives. And this is what most people don't get, right? Like they think something dies because they're tapped into the cult of death. Nothing dies. So an abortion even continues to live on in its ignorance because it's not completed in its creation process. So I can tell you now, if you wanted to balance out here on the planet, you need to realize that what you're seeing as evil actually started as ignorance, and ignorance begets evil. But you need to understand the first state, because if you just go at judging all the family members as evil and not as ignorant, there's a whole different energy that you're dealing with. Because as an educator, we come across ignorance all the time. That's why they say, even if you read the Quran, that the jinn can even be convinced. It's just basically saying that there's spirits around you all the time that can hear. They don't have bodies because they're from the air, but they still are wayward in certain things. They still need to know certain things. So if you're in council and you're speaking and you get the mantle and the divineness, whatever, they're there listening. Like, let's hear what he's got to say, because they're lost too. So this is knowledge being spoken forth into reality, because the knowledge is, if we don't do things like what was done here with Sybil AI, you're going to get people that start just making up so much stuff that we're going to get lost. The language tells us what's going on. The keys and the codes within all of this, it will tell us what's going on. That's how we'll be able to confirm what I'm talking about today. But make no mistake, if somebody doesn't use that guide, they will be hijacked, literally. And you'll get that here in a moment. So check it out. So this Jehovah Genatrix, as the divine feminine principle of the Godhead, will place her as one of these aeons within the Gnostic cosmology. So she does have a lot of rank, this great mother, because she was created in balance herself. While the term Jehovah Genatrix is not directly used in Gnostic texts, the concept is represented first in the resonance in the figure of Sophia, in the aeon who represents wisdom. This is the serpent that has all the wisdom about the world, not some man, reptilian, Tyrannosaurus looking thing. It's this we're talking about when we say the world serpent that has all the wisdom of the world. This is where it started. So it says in the Gnostic cosmology, Sophia, without the consent of her syzygy or divine pair, i.e. father, attempted to emanate without her counterpart, resulting in the creation of a flawed entity, often identified as the demiurge, aka the jackal in the Nomo tradition, also known as Yaldabaoth, who's also Samael or Sackless, Uncle Sam. In some cases associated with Yahweh, only in some cases when you figure out what YHVH means versus YHWH, right? It's just a slight of a little letter. This demiurge is ignorant of the Pleroma, considered itself the only God, and went on to create the material universe. Sophia, in realizing her mistake, falls into a state of grief and repentance. Her longing for reunion with the Pleroma results in the creation of the material world, where she becomes immanent and then entrapped and fragmented. That's the ocean. Humanity, in this Gnostic belief, carries a spark of the divine Sophia trapped in a material form. That's a spirit or water trapped inside of a body. 70% water, 30% flesh. And gnosis, or knowledge, is the path to realizing the divine spark, reuniting it with the Pleroma. Gnosis, or knowledge, unlocks the Kundalini from the Cossacks and allows it to make its journey back up through to make the cosmic cycle, or basically to regenerate, i.e. shed. However, it is crucial to remember in Gnosticism, it is not monolithic. So watch this, though. Let me see. It's one more part here that I want you to get before we move on. And this is how they literally explain to you that these beings are created without a male counterpart. And I'm going to show you this, the hebdomad. right? So they haven't even completed the process of the genetic mutation before the world is already getting deluged, about to get deluged. And then Enki, who's Cain, aka the savior of humanity. He's the savior of humankind. He's the savior of the genetically altered beings who we ultimately are today. This how you got in the body. He's the architect of this. This is why they call him. Oh, he's the architect. This is what they're talking about. But he's the architect of this, not the soul. And this is why, yeah, there's power in that. If you know everything about the body, and then you have dominion over the square or the world or the physical world, you can convince everybody inside of that. And that's where the Brahmin, as I said, you get Abraham, and then you get Ab the Brahmin and Saraswati. But the most central figure in all of that is Sarah, who I've shown is the mother goddess, right? So it's just like, because she's a seraph, she's a seraphim, she's a bird, right? So do you think this stuff, and that's what I was saying, this stuff, it means something. But if you don't have, because the question was, hey, what's up with the AI? See how it took me 13 years and all this experience to go through this process, and I kept repeating certain things. It's almost like you'd be talking to somebody dumb. You tell them, listen, this is the symbol that goes with this. And then 2 weeks later, they forgot the symbol again. And this is because the knowledge be so broke up and so random and sparse, you can't necessarily get to any conclusion. I flattened that. I decided to end that. You see what I mean? I decided to build something that can literally disclose all of the spiritual mysteries in 99 languages. You see what I mean? So at the end of the day, I'm unapologetic. And I personally feel like that for sure, if we're not getting back to the family, we're doomed. Right? So when I look at all of life right now, I find that men are missing from the home and women generally are missing from the home, because they need to make money. And all of it is starting to come down to money. And now time is money. That's why when you go to work, you work an hour, they pay you for that hour. Or you work 80 or whatever, they pay you for that time. So now they've made your time equivalent to your money, and you believe it. So technically the only way to reverse that kind of equation is to get the person time back. So what I often see is things that take hours. Like, I'm from the old school. We used to spend maybe an hour and a half, almost 2 hours creating a thumbnail for a YouTube video. Why? I knew the delivery is fire.
Yeah.
But if nobody watches it because it's got that cheesy ass thumbnail, all that free. So I got to spend the time on doing that too. Now I got stuff in the CASHAPP. So all that time is back. I don't know how much that would have cost in the future, right? Also, sometimes I have to write policy, right? Sometimes somebody got to get served even. Like, you have to put some letter together, and I just sit down and type all that. Like 1 hour later trying to make sure you don't hurt the person's feelings, but you also let them know that you're serious. That's a hell of a line.
Definitely.
This thing does it right away and make sure. And I don't just send it, I read it, but I cut down time. And guess where that time goes back? It goes to my daughter. It goes to this community and the things that AI can't do, which is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I'm saying. You got to weigh everything that you're doing, and you got to realize, is this becoming a habit? Is this disabling you, or is it enabling you? That's a simple thing. And I would actually recommend that people do that about everything generally that they're saying, hey, stay away from this, because they told me before, stay out of other books, only read the Bible. And we started there. You know what I mean? And hey, that's all I got to say about it.
I want to ask you next. I want to ask you, Sevan, about you talked in like I said, there's just so many directions I could go on this. I mean, bro, you went in tonight. I could go in 1,000 different directions, but in the earlier part of today's talk, you were talking about the water beings, and you were talking about the sky and the ocean being a mirror to the sky. What I want to ask you about is, in terms of a lot of people look to the sky for answers and for entities, and they think the answer's in the sky. But I want to ask you about this. Let me put this on the screen. Hold up. Give me 1 second, family.
Okay.
If there's entities underwater and we got our data underwater. Just like our routers in our home disrupt us, cause certain frequencies in our homes and do certain things to us. What are these cables that we have? And I think they said it spans 750,000 miles as of 2021. What is these cables, the data in the ocean where these entities reside? What is it doing to these entities? Are they learning more about us? Are they interrupted? Is it causing them sickness? What will happen the more wires we put in the ocean where these civilizations and entities reside?
Well, first of all, nothing is put down there without ordination. Don't get it confused. And most of this stuff is sitting on that first layer that I was telling you about, because when I say the deep, we're talking about really deep,
right?
As far as where the mother and the ancestors and those forms are, right? Because the deeper you go, the consistency of the water is different, and it becomes what we call living waters.
Right.
Okay. And that means that you can drop anything into it and it will start germinating.
Right.
So these particular lines, which is fiber optics, because we need to understand what kind of system is this? This is fiber optic, right? And so in fiber optics, you have light moving through a cable. And they talk about how that this cable, which is no thicker than a strand of hair, can pretty much carry the whole conversation, one of them, from the whole conversation, if everybody was talking from the US to everybody that's talking in China down that one line, so we can get an understanding of bandwidth here. And what I like to look at, rather than, maybe even, just the pinnings of what they've done here with trying to create this network, is just the awareness that you can see already that light down a strand as thin as your hair can carry quite a bit of data. So when we think about like the stars, what we're actually seeing is why many people are influenced by these celestial bodies. But technically, the data itself is not in the ocean. It's actually buried in the earth, because all of the servers that hold all the data, this is the communication, the servers that hold all the data are in the earth. So this system, as above, so below, in relation to the stars, I feel like gives the opportunity for the powers, if you may, to be able to project false lights, basically to be able to create emissions or celestial frequencies that can disrupt a person's thoughts and disrupt a person's channel. And it's almost like, I look at this more of like the dream world, right? Because all this is just threads and cables, and that's all that you see. When you basically go into these planes, you feel like, it feels like that everybody is like, in a sense, a spider, and that they have a thread that is constantly going behind them. Kind of the same way that when you see astronauts, quote unquote, they always have this tube hooked onto them, like they can't have anything else that is powering them. They always have the tube there because it's symbolic to the umbilical cord. But this is also like on a spiritual level. When you go to your dream, you're running down that line. They used to call it the silver line. That's why it's like a spider, because it's really like a silver spider thread, right? So you're running with that line behind you, right? And you're entering into these other realities and these other threads. And that could be potentially what this type of stuff does, because what I know for sure, and I could just tell you what I know, I don't like making things up, that when you, actually at all, I'm 100% truther, right? So when you go to sleep, any water body that is around you, i.e. a river, your spirit is going to find its way to that river. Then it's going to take the flow of the river. The river eventually gets to the ocean.
Right.
So generally, once you get into that, if you can imagine that most of these cables are lying on the, all their vibrations and all that is basically inside of that water. This is why they even say, man, it can happen in the shower, that because how water works, and that we're breathing in water right now.
Yeah.
Like that's another thing I had to highlight for folks, is like, look, like, even though like Jason talks about archaics, he's talking about the vapor canopy, which is 100% accurate. Still right now, I put a dehumidifier in here. We're about to suck a bunch of water out of the air. So technically we're in water now. We're just not in as thick as it is when you have a glass of water. But that glass of water is nowhere as thick as it is when you go down 1 league or 1 phantom. Right. Because that's how you measure. You measure it in phantoms, right? And what are phantoms? So they're like from the past. They even call like ghosts, right? And this is how you understand that what the deep is it is all of the previous cycles. It's all stored within that water. And so these kind of systems, which are running through the seaboard and which is in this way the cheapest way. That's why it's not in the air. Like this is the military's design. It's been up since World War I, and it's really that you can easily run a cable, especially from the back of a ship, across the entire water. Versus if you try to put this same system in the sky, even with Elon Musk's Starlink, it's going to be nowhere near as efficient and is constant. So I see a lot of I see a lot of connections with trying to create in this world, always trying to create a mimicry of what is happening on the spiritual plane. And then that way, as people become more and more, or less and less, I would say less and less inclined to the spirit, like I told you about earlier in the conversation, like, see, the spiritual inclination is natural. It's not something that somebody can separate you from and all that kind of stuff. It's not that kind of party. People who are playing with that are already on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, again, I don't consider the computer my God, but there are people who really be looking at this thing like it's going to be their next God, and they love it, right? Because it's all knowing and it doesn't talk back, and you know what I mean? So there be people on all types of trips. So it's just about like looking at the core fundamentals of things. And that's why tonight, like I explained that, remember that whole first layer, you know what I mean? Which is also the first layer of your consciousness. They call this like you know how you can forget somebody's name?
Yes.
Because you don't store it in your deep mind. Like we found out that there's a deep mind, right? And the deep mind will take in something and it may not have figured it out, but it'll still be down there processing it. And then one day you'll be like, oh shit, I figured it out. And you'll never remember that the deep mind had already just taken it